Hi, I'm Peter Corr. Welcome to Rejoin Rants.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Burton, and on this episode we will be talking about freedom of movement after Brexit, or the lack of it, with representation from groups Bremain in Spain, that's myself and my colleague Helen, and our guest Andrew Hesselden from Save Freedom of Movement. Firstly, I'm going to ask our guests to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they do. First, we will go to Helen Johnston. Helen, would you like to tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, please?
Hi, well, as Lisa said, I'm her colleague on the Bremain in Spain Council, and I'm also the editor of the Bremain in Spain newsletter. So shameless plug here, go to bremaininSpain.com and sign up to get our monthly newsletter if you don't already, because it's really good. And apart from that, I'm also a member of the Grassroots for Europe Council, and in fact, I'm its secretary. And so I have two hats and the reason I'm involved with Bremain in Spain is because I live in Spain. I'm a long-term resident, so I was covered under the withdrawal agreement, and I've been living in Spain since about 2000. Yeah, since the year 2000, and was an English teacher, and now I'm a translator. And I'm not desperately affected by Brexit as such, but I'll be talking about how Brexit could potentially affect people like me, and how Brexit has changed the goalposts for people who moved before the withdrawal agreement. And Andrew, I think, will be talking more about how Brexit is affecting people who would like to move around Europe since Brexit.
Absolutely. Thank you, Helen. Andrew, could you please do the same and tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'm a campaign director for Save Freedom of Movement. And I also coordinate between a number of campaigns designed to bring together and help people who live with lives in more than one country, who are generally speaking not adequately protected by the withdrawal agreement. The biggest one of these is called 180 Days in Spain, and we've got 8,000 members there. And we've got lots of supporters now for Save Freedom of Movement. It's an idea that people are really starting to get quite excited about again. In terms of my background, I studied languages. I probably slightly beat Helen to teaching in Spain, as I had my year abroad from university in 1998 out in Gran Canaria. And I taught English out there for a year, and then I worked as a holiday rep for a while, and since then I've had a career in career in London. I've worked in Germany, I've worked in France, worked in Mallorca. And for me, I speak a number of European languages. I'm hugely passionate about living and working in multiple places, and this is one of the things that Brexit's made very difficult. So yeah, that's really why I decided to set up Save Freedom of Movement, because immediately after the referendum in those years before Brexit, I felt that we weren't talking enough about how freedom of movement actually helps British people be mobile in Europe.
Yeah, excellent. A lot of people don't understand freedom of movement before. They just think it's something about moving to Europe or living in Europe. So
definitely,
it is, isn't it?
Of course it is.
It can be.
Of course it is. I'll just touch on a little bit about Bremain in Spain, the work we do, how we were formed, and things like that. Bremain in Spain is an anti-Brexit, pro-EU Rejoin group set up in 2016, just after the referendum. We're a group of committed rejoiners who believe that the only way to bring back all our rights is by full rejoining the EU. Our chair, Sue Wilson, was the main plaintiff in a legal challenge against Theresa May. in 2000, which ended up in court in 2019, started in 2018. And that was the legal challenge where it revealed basically that if the referendum had been legally binding, the law breaking of Leave EU would have annulled the result. However, the timing, it was said to be out of time because negotiations were already ongoing, and obviously it wasn't legally binding. So that's a bit of a legacy. Sue actually received an MBE for her work for Brits in Spain and Europe. After Brexit, we have 6,000 members. So after Brexit, we worked very closely with the British Embassy in Madrid, just trying to ensure people got their residency in order. And we also fed up the problems that British nationals were facing on the ground to the embassy in Madrid, and then they would report that to their colleagues in the Spanish government. So we worked closely with them for a number of years. Sadly, now there are still a lot of issues, but funding has been withdrawn for that sort of support. As we've already touched on, we collaborate with an awful lot of groups. Most of us are living in Spain. We do have members all over Europe and in the UK, but we do collaborate with a lot of groups. I myself am on the National Council Executive Committee of European Movement UK. Helen's already said she's the Secretary of Grassroots for Europe, and we also have a couple of seats on National Rejoin March Committee. We actively campaigned for many years for Votes for Life, which overturned the 15-year limit for Brits abroad to have a vote. That came into fruition in time for the last general election. We are members of the Make Votes Matter Alliance, which fights for PR in the UK. Currently, our big campaign we're working with Unlock Democracy, Live Dems Abroad, and some others on a campaign to get overseas constituencies and dedicated MPs for Brits abroad. Now, many countries have this, including France, Croatia, Italy, Lithuania, Portugal, and many more. And we feel that there's so many of us, approximately 1 in 9 Brits live abroad, because we do love to emigrate, and it would give us better representation. So that's fundamentally what we do. I should probably state that we are a group of European Movement UK, but we are the only group that is based outside of the UK.
So what I would like to say to you and Helen, Bremain in Spain guys, not leaving you out, Andrew. Are you a member of Bremain in Spain?
I am, yes.
Oh right, so you're all Bremain in Spain, really? Then?
Yeah, we're all Bremain in Spain. So, and a lot of our members are and support the work that Bremain in Spain does.
I think they're really brilliant, and you stick out. You're really active. The stuff you put out is good. It gets a lot of attention that I see on social media anyway. And I know lots of people have heard of you. And I was saying to Lisa earlier that you're kind of like the other local groups, as in Cheltenham for Europe or Cornwall for Europe, but you're in Spain. But compared to a lot of the other groups I'm finding, you're very big and active. And a lot of the others are being ran by literally maybe 1 or 2 people, sometimes nobody, they're just there in name only. So I wondered what makes you different? Why are you so much better in that way than most of the others? There are a lot of other big ones out there as well, like Leeds for Europe do a lot, Cornwall for Europe do a lot, I know. I'll stop there because I'll miss people out and upset them, but there are other big ones. But there's also plenty out there that are really doing nothing because they just don't have, like if there's one person doing 1 or 2 different groups, they can't go and even do a street stall, for example, like that. So I just wondered, what do you think makes you different and how can we spread it?
Right, well,
and yeah, one of you, Helen.
I think you're right. We definitely do punch above our weight. We are actually, the council, we're a small group, but we do have a lot of members and a lot of support online. from 2016, when Bremain in Spain was first set up, there were a lot of very active, very good people working on the online side, on our social media, and they've really pushed that out a lot. We've been very lucky, for example, with the format of our newsletter. Ever since it started, before my time, we've had this Bremainers Ask feature, where we put questions to a figure in the Remain movement, and we've had some really high-profile people over the years. And each time, that helps us to get new high-profile people, because we just send a message to Dominic Grieve and say, hey, we've had this person, Tina Mittler, and this person before. So that they go, ooh. So we then get these people, and that, I think, is one of our biggest ways of getting the Bremain in Spain name out there. We get one of these every month. We've just done a session with Stella Creasy from Labour for Europe, and also our
fantastic.
And our really great social media team, who've been working in the background for years, making the Bremain in Spain presence on Twitter and Facebook huge. So yeah, and of course all the stuff that Lisa was saying about the work that Sue Wilson's did, very high profile stuff, the court cases. She got an MBE for her work helping British citizens during the transition period, when it was a mess, frankly. We had the two wows of COVID and the Brexit transition happening at the same time. And Bremain in Spain did a lot of work and got a lot of press coverage from doing that. So yeah, I think for a lot of reasons we do kind of punch above our weight. We don't do street stalls.
No.
We don't have a street. We're all over the place.
They are. And we should also mention we have an excellent lobby team, which lobby lords and MPs and stuff like that. And because we have, evidence and experience of how Brexit has affected Brits in Europe, we've also presented evidence to Lord Select Committees, Parliament and stuff like that on citizens' rights, election rights, and a few more things. So yeah, we're pretty all round, and we do try and deal at quite a high.
But what is it that got you to where you were? What at the start? Who started it? Who's the founder? Is it Sue?
No, it wasn't Sue, though she was involved from the very beginning. I believe it was Carrie and...
I can't remember her name.
Carrie Fraser, I think, started it, but it became so big so quickly, and she had a young family that she couldn't take it on. And so Sue was part of Bremain, and Sue stepped in as chair and has...
And was that before the referendum?
No. After the referendum.
After the referendum.
Set up. I think it was October it was formed, after the referendum.
2016.
Yeah.
I think that's true of pretty much the entire Remain Rejoin movement, isn't it? It was pretty non-existent before the campaign. We all just thought it was such a stupid idea that we didn't need to campaign.
That's what makes NRM a bit different, I think, because it is brand new, and I am brand new to this as well. And it was kind of born out of seeing, because I kind of found this big pro-European community for 2019, and I thought it was great, and I found loads of really nice people, and it was massive, and it was really buzzing, trying to stop that. It's just trying to get a second referendum on at the people's vote. But then Boris won, and it's almost like the entire thing vanished overnight and disappeared. And that's where NRM come from, thinking we need to get everyone back together into one place at the march and other events. And then since NRM started, it got better and better, and it started growing and growing again. But since the election, it's sort of took a nosedive again, and interest has died down. Are you finding the same in Bremain? And if so, why do you think?
I think people are fatigued. And I think part of it was the Tories were so horrific, and they just stood against most people's morals and standards, that the fight was so hard to get rid of them, that I think there was a huge collective sigh of relief. And I think a lot of people were very fatigued. and needed a bit of a break, and were hopeful that Labour would pick up this mantle and work for us. Obviously, now we're seeing that that's not really the case. Starmer's not even going for the youth mobility arrangement, which is really low-hanging fruit and a real test from the EU to see if Britain are really willing to change. So I think that pro-Europeans will start to become more engaged and start to get angrier as Labour become less and less effective. And okay, so I wanted to touch on what you require now to move it. Now, I'm not going to go through everything. We are not experts on migration. We are not experts on visas, but I've got a little bit of an idea. So I'm going to run through a few ways that you can now move to Spain and Europe. I'm going to quote Spain because every EU country is slightly different on requirements, things like that. So for what is required now, and this is the challenge, all those people on social media who go, well, you just fill in a few forms, innit? People have been moving to Europe for years. Okay, so here's the challenge.
I've yet to find this magic form that you just fill in.
I know, right?
This is really good because I'm quite clueless about this, I'll be honest and upfront with you. And I want to learn about it from this podcast and anyone else listening to do the same. But I also want this I want to learn what the counter is to, I can just fill out a few forms. I want to learn what the counter is so I can use it forever going forward.
Well, I suppose I could start by saying all types of visas are taking months and months. Some students are having to cancel their courses. I mean, it's just awful. And I believe that you either have to go to London or Edinburgh to sort visas out, you know, especially like short-term visas and things like that. And of course, there's a cost. But I'll run through a few main types, and this is not exhausted, but it is the main one. So even for a student visa, as I've said, lots of people have already had to cancel courses because it takes too long. You have to provide your criminal records, a bank statement with a minimum of 10,000 euros, and proof that you have enrolled in a course that's a minimum of 20 hours per week. So the next one, now this is a non-lucrative. So this is for people who would come to Spain and they don't intend to work. So therefore, if you're wealthy, if you're retired, etc. So you need 28,000 euros in a bank account. If you're a non-pensioner, you need medical insurance. And of course, underlying conditions can be hundreds a month, depending on your age. For a single individual, the minimum income requirements are 2,400 euros per month. And a single applicant, so if there's a couple, is an extra 600 on top of that. So that immediately wipes out the possibility for anyone who's a pensioner, for example, and living on just a state pension, anyone who's, you know, on a lower income, even if that income comes from non-work, that really wipes that out. Now, work visas. Any specific job position you're applying for must be inside a shortage list that respects the national situation of employment in the country. So not all jobs will be valid. We have to consider too that employers have a huge pool of possibilities to hire from all the EU nations and across the Schengen zone whose citizens do not need a visa. You also obviously need, there's no criminal record allowed there. So for a standardized job, you're really going to struggle. And of course, when you do apply for a visa, that visa is specific to one job. So if it doesn't work out, you can't just move on and find another job somewhere else, which actually opens up people to a lot of abuse from employers. There's a highly qualified visa available, but you have to earn over 40,000 a year for that and have private medical insurance. There is a golden visa available, which I believe Spain are going to get rid of. I believe it's still currently in existence, where you have to invest at least 500,000 in Spanish real estate or have €1 million in shares of a Spanish company. You have to prove that you have enough financial means to support yourself and your family. That's at least 30,000 for the first person and 10,000 for each relative. No criminal record, private health insurance. And there's the nomad visa. This one is actually becoming quite popular, but again, it's a very, very, very limited amount of people who can do this. So you have to work remotely for a company. So if you're a home worker, something like that, but that has to be a non-Spanish company, although you can make up to 20% of your income from Spanish companies. The employer that you work for, your main employer, has to agree that you can come and live in Spain and get that visa. You have to have graduated from a prestigious university or business school, or demonstrate previous work experience for 3 years. You have to have an annual salary of at least 31,752 euros a year, which is about 2,650 euros a month. And there's something called the family reunification visa, which sounds great, right? You're here in Spain, there's me, I can bring my kids over, whatever. It just doesn't work like that. So it only applies to dependents under 18, or a disabled adult child, a spouse, common law partner. Maybe it's possible for a very elderly relative, but you have to prove that you can financially support them and show money transfers having been realized between you and them for the past few years. So what was it like before? Well, kind of, you just packed a bag, got a couple of weeks accommodation, flew over, looked for a job, or you just applied for a job, you came and had a look, you came and stayed with friends, had a look around. It was like moving to Scotland. Anyone, if you had, that's all you needed to be actually was courageous to do it, because it's not easy moving to another country. And what we're finding is that Brits pre-EU were hugely diverse from class, like across the UK, bar workers, hospitality, business owners, single parents, wealthy people, students, retirees. Thing is, now going forward, of course, that diversity is going to disappear because, as I've just said, anyone on a low income or a minimum wage will not be able to come and move and work in the EU. So that's kind of the basics. Do not take everything as gospel. Please do your own research. I'll maybe put a couple of links below look at yourself. So that's kind of where we are with that. And Andrew, obviously your group base is very different, and they experience different sort of issues. So maybe you'd like to kind of touch on the main issues and about the people you kind of represent you.
Sure, absolutely. And well, if I sort of just jump back to our question, I think Peter, you asked of Bremain Spain in terms of when we set up. Like most of the Rejoin Remain organisations, we set up after the referendum, because we all trusted the government was trying to keep us in the EU at the time, and boy, did that change. So I set up Save Freedom Movement back in February 2019. And around the same time, perhaps a little bit later, a completely separate campaign called 180 Days in Spain. And the reason for that, at the time, I was a member of Bremain in Spain, as I was part of the British in Europe group and all these other organisations, because I'm someone who's highly mobile in Europe. And it matters to me to be able to live in multiple places. For example, my wife can work in one country, I can work temporarily in another. I work as a consultant, and I could travel. A client could call me on a Friday, and I could be on a plane on Monday and working with no major costs. No real need to get much advice. You could just start and kind of worry about it as you got on. So all of that changed when Brexit happened. But whilst organisations like British in Europe and Bremain in Spain were understandably focused on people who had moved permanently to Spain or France or wherever, there were a large number of people that were in my position that were highly mobile between the two. And the other group of people that were slightly older people who, so my generation were still wanting to work all over Europe, and a slightly older generation of people were either ready to stop working and were in the last few years of their career, or had already retired. And people like that had often saved over many years, and they bought a home somewhere. Some were lucky enough to have bought, a small apartment somewhere in Spain. They kept a house. They had a young family in the UK. and some of them might have managed to buy a little ski chalet somewhere. Bear in mind that the property prices are an awful lot less out in Europe than in the UK. But a lot of people have saved money, and they developed this lifestyle to take advantage of the single market. So we had two things. We had one group of people who were highly mobile and really needed continued work rights. And for that, I set up Save Freedom of Movement, because we wanted to promote the importance and the value of the kind of mobility that visas just didn't replace. But then to boost the number of people, to boost the support, I also spotted that a lot of Bremain and Spain members were actually trying to live in two places, and they weren't going to be protected by the withdrawal agreement. And this wasn't because they'd done anything wrong or they'd not registered, or it's simply because they weren't required to register, because they didn't actually spend enough time in Spain each year. But nevertheless, they were flying back and forwards, staying in Spain for a month, 2 months at a time, a highly mobile existence and part of the community, both in Spain and in the UK. And this actually got worse as Brexit happened, and young families, plus people's parents, made the decision to move permanently to Europe before Brexit. So even people who thought they were mainly UK based suddenly found their children moved with their grandchildren to France. And what that meant was that every time, if they were visiting their family in France, they were, limited to 90 days in a 180-day period. But what that meant was that they couldn't go anywhere else in Europe. So I think actually initially, whereas people didn't fully understand how it would affect their mobility, but as things developed, so the two campaigns I run separately. And Save Freedom Movement is promoting Restore Mutual Freedom Movement, and we aim to assist any rejoin the EU or rejoin single market movement by improving public support for freedom movement. And then the 180 Days in Spain campaign is a little bit more short term. So obviously we have lots of people who support rejoining the EU, rejoining the single market. They also support freedom of movement. But that's a lobbying operation, which we kind of copied from Bremain in Spain. And we write to UK MPs and we write to Spanish politicians to encourage them to think about the gaps in the withdrawal agreement and to look for ways of finding solutions to this problem. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, really helpful, I think. I think that was really interesting, and probably a lot of people don't really think of people like you're talking about when they think of freedom of movement. You're right, they do think of people that have moved permanently somewhere, or people that have moved to the UK from other European countries. I think most people, especially anti-immigration lot, only think of people coming to live to the UK when they think freedom of movement, don't they?
If you think about actually what freedom of movement means for Europeans, it's three things. It's the ability to go and work somewhere, it's the ability to settle there permanently, and it also covers routine travel. It makes travel a lot easier. And what essentially happened when Brexit happened was, the UK wanted to stop work and settlement. We all understand that's what they did. But because they actually stopped freedom of movement, they also cancelled easy travel. And that's the bit that never really got replaced. Meanwhile, incredibly, and people always are gobsmacked when I tell them this, European citizens can still visit the UK for 6 months per visit. It's not even per year, it's per visit. So the UK barely changed the arrangements for visitors. And incredibly, since January of this year, January 2024, EU citizens who are visiting the UK can also bring their laptop and work remotely. I mean, people are shocked.
How can we get that? You need to be able to say that in 20 seconds, so we can just put it everywhere. That's what we need to do with that information. Because you're right. That's when you put it how you just put it. It's
incredible.
Unfortunately, the 180 days is EU
A Schengen-wide thing,
a
yes.
Schengen-wide EU law. And the only thing that individual countries could do, they're not going to change that without EU-wide approval. There is an option. Each individual country can have as many different visa schemes as they like. You know, Spain introduced the digital nomad visa with requirements and things like that. So
and France has a 6-month visa as well,
and France
and Germany's easier, and Switzerland's easier, and things like that.
I mean, I do know someone who extends their because they have a residence in France and they have to apply for a 6-month visa every time they want to go out. But again, it's costly, and they have to go to London, and they have to, you know, it's a nightmare apparently.
But they have to attend an interview each year.
Yep, every year.
So, the thing with visas is apart from the cost of the visa and this magical form that you have to fill in, it's also the limits on time you can stay, income requirements, and all the rest of it. And it's perfectly possible to make those very low and very easy. You can have a visa that could just be, yeah, fine, fill in this form and promise to go at the end of it. And if you overstay, that's it, you never get to come back. But that is one way around these things.
I suppose we should also take note of the lack of recognition of qualifications after.
Yes, definitely.
After Brexit. So now I don't know which ones have been accepted, which ones haven't, which ones, you know, do work, which don't. So before Brexit, all professional qualifications were equal. So if you were an architect or whatever qualified in the UK, the qualification would be the same and be acceptable across Europe. Much of those qualifications now are not. They have to be agreed on a one-by-one basis with individual countries. So a lot of professionals, even though they may have the means and the income to move, their qualification would not now be recognised in the European country that they are moving to, depending on what they are. So that's another thing that has happened after Brexit, which
I think so. The important thing is what Andrew was talking about when he first came to Spain. He was working as a teacher, and that was my first job in Spain. I arrived with a TEFL certificate, and of course the brilliant thing that I've got is the ability to speak English, which is one of our most fantastic marketing points. Our language is the most in-demand language in the world, in Europe, and there's a massive demand for people who can work in hotels, restaurants, in tourism, as tour guides, as English teachers, in bars, all of these jobs. English is, you see so many adverts now for all sorts of jobs, and they want English. And we've gone and shot ourselves massively in the foot by making it difficult to just go and get those jobs. You used to be able to do what I did, which was get off a plane with a suitcase, I walked around schools leaving my CV, and I picked up some hours here and some hours there, and I got a bit of bar work to supplement it. And eventually, over 2 or 3 years, I managed to build myself up to eventually having a full-time job. But now I would have to have that full-time job before I came, and a company prepared to go through all the expense of sponsoring me and. They're going to go, yeah, right, but there's this Irish person who's got just as many qualifications as you, and so I think we'll just have them if that's all right.
Well, I had a contract come up in Switzerland, and this was just before real Brexit happened, so this was January 2020. And
I like that you just called it real Brexit there, by the way.
as in the date it officially happened, like 31st of January. That's what I mean. Yeah, real Brexit as opposed to this. So the recruiter basically, I expressed some interest in this contract role in Switzerland. And bear in mind, actually, Switzerland is now one of the easier countries Brits can actually go to. There are a lot fewer restrictions in Switzerland than Spain, for example. But even in Switzerland, back in 2020, the recruiter said to me that their client would not consider any British people because they were worried that the withdrawal agreement wouldn't materialise, that the TCA, and they just said British people would be too much of a nightmare, and they were worried that you wouldn't stay. So we were getting discrimination, and lots of people will say the same kind of thing. And now, you know, when ultimately if you get a role, you've got to go through a 3 to 8 month visa process. It just doesn't work for contract work anymore.
I saw adverts recently for TUI, the tour company, and they are recruiting for next summer for Spain for people to do as couriers, tour guides, the person who meets you off the bus with the sign saying,
I did this myself back in 2000.
And the adverts are saying you must have the right to work in the EU or be an EU citizen. And this is a company that's catering to British tourists.
I know.
And they can't employ Brits to do the job.
I actually think they're
British tourists.
Is that what they meant by control?
Yeah. I think they're being a bit lazy, actually, because I think they're just doing it for convenience. Because
of course, it's easier, but that company, it's a business, and company applying for visas and getting all that sort of, it's a cost. And while there are Irish and Maltese and Swedish people with bloody good English who can do those jobs, they'll just say,
why take a Brit?
Plus, at the same time as all these new rubbish rules come in, there's the cost of living crisis everywhere. So everyone's going to be trying to cut costs up in some way or another, aren't they? Not look especially for English people, even though they know it's going to cost more. Because
it's also, if you go to the tourist areas, the British tourist areas, all of the bars used to rely on youngsters, British youngsters. Every bar owner in the British tourist areas, certainly where I live here in Lanzarote, you go around, you said they are just screaming out for staff. These have youngsters who come over, share accommodation, work summer jobs. That's a lot of them would end up staying and stuff like that. The ski industry as well, the winter ski industry, youngsters can't do that. And it's a real shame. And even for what a lot of people don't realise when we lost freedom of movement, yes, we are protected under the withdrawal agreement. I'm a permanent resident. I still can't have more than 180 days in the rest of...
that only covers Spain, doesn't it?
And you don't have on with freedom of movement. You can't go and work in any other country but Spain. So you're stuck here in Spain.
And even Brits here who...
Can I just quickly ask... You can come back to the UK, can you, or not?
Now that's an interesting question. Yes and no. I can come back to Spain, but I can't bring my husband with me.
You can come back to Spain, or
sorry, Britain.
I was confused.
I'm British. I've got a British passport. I've got a lifetime right to move back to Britain and live and work there. But my Spanish husband would have to qualify under non-EU immigration rules, on third country immigration rules, which would mean we would have to have an income of about £30,000 a year, £29,000 a year, I think it is, and that would have to be his income, not mine. And I should have a job already in the UK, but how do I get a job before I go there? And all these issues. So
it's horrendous.
That's crazy. So it's almost like being kicked out.
One of the things that was never covered under the withdrawal agreement was the right to return with family. They just, up until 2022, there was a little transition period to the end of nearly the end of 2022, where British people could return to the UK with non-British spouses and dependents. And then that door closed at the end of 22. So you had that little 2-year gap where you had to decide where you and your family were going to live forever.
This is literally tearing families apart.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about, moving the goalpost, because people made the choice to move to the EU under different rules.
Absolutely.
I mean, one thing to check, the rules have been changed and that's shit. But at least anybody who wants to try and move from the UK to Britain, or from the EU, from Britain to the EU, or vice versa, they now know what the rules are, and the rules are bloody awful, as Andrew has been telling us. But people who had moved in the past, they changed the goalpost. People made plans to live in Europe. They got married, they had children, on the understanding that they could always go home. And that goalpost was moved, and that is really unfair.
What's really interesting with this issue is it actually exposes one of the things people don't realise about EU membership is that it's like another layer on top of your national rights, because this right to bring your spouse home, bring your spouse back to your country, doesn't work in the country where you're a citizen. Not in every country. In some it may do, in some others it won't. But if you're, let's say you're Italian and you're living in Spain, then you have the right to bring your spouse from anywhere in the world to live with you in Spain. But that doesn't necessarily apply if you try and bring your spouse to Italy, where you're actually a citizen. And this is the problem we have in the UK. The UK really doesn't seem to like people bringing their spouse at all. They just are not bothered about keeping families together. Some countries seem to be a little bit more generous about that. But it's a layer that these EU rights actually only apply when you're not in your own country. So
it's down to a very racist view that people get married to bring in spouses.
Yes.
From countries that are not necessarily in the EU.
Yeah.
But it's a blanket that affects everybody.
Yes, a blanket thing. And there are also families, people don't realise this, who have children of mixed status.
Yeah.
They might have British children and Spanish children between them. Some are Spanish and some, and they have to go through all these visa requirements. So if you have an aging parent and you want to go back to look after them for 3 months, 6 months or something, you just can't do it anymore. If you have children who have a different citizenship to you, a different passport, if you have a spouse. And likewise, elderly people living in Spain, and we know of a case, Vanessa, her mother, Margot, had lived in Spain for over 20 odd years. She won't mind me talking about this because I've written an article about her before. She got very ill, she had a stroke, and she tried to come back to look after her mother. She has a minimum, her mother has a little pension, she had a little bit of income. She jumped through hoops and tried to get visas and everything like that, and she just failed. And Margot didn't want to go home. She had a lovely community around her. She'd been here for over 20 years. And eventually, Vanessa had to take her mother back to the UK, where they are now fighting to try and get back to Spain. So it has these terrible effects on families that people just don't understand, and they really don't realise.
Well, we have members that are split apart. You know, one that had residency before the withdrawal agreement, and others and their spouse that doesn't because they work in the UK and they were hoping to limp on a few years. And some of those people have given up and they've just gone back to the UK now because it's just too much stress, too much effort to live apart. And it's really sad. And then dependent, you know, we've got people who have to spend large amounts of time in the UK looking after elderly parents. Or they would like to, or they moved to Spain with visas since Brexit, and they want to bring their mother or their father out to live with them, and they can't. It's really sad.
Another thing that happened was that Boris Johnson refused to move the transition period. He was actually offered by the EU an extension of the transition period because of COVID. Because COVID was just stopping everything. But he said, no, got to get Brexit done. I was elected to get Brexit done. We're going to get it done. So they stuck to the deadline. And that entire transition period, which was when people had a window to make arrangements, to buy homes, to get jobs, to do all these different things, that window was effectively closed because all the...
It was 6 days, Helen. It was 6 days. It was between the 24th of December, Christmas Eve, 2020... And the 1st of January 2021, they wasted the entire transition period that they were going to have. Boris just couldn't make a decision, made a decision 6 days before. And people had 6 days to make a decision to move.
But people who could have been moving, you had to move before Brexit and be in situ in order to claim permanent residence. And people had their homes set of people who'd bought properties and then couldn't move to Spain because of the travel restrictions. There was a period when only people with residence or Spanish citizens could enter Spain. So these people who were stuck in Britain with a home to go to in Spain weren't allowed to get on a plane and go to Spain and establish their residence. And those travel restrictions were lifted at the end of December, and they had until the end of January to get on a plane, to pack all their belongings, to everything, and to get into Spain and to get to the town hall. Lots of town halls were still closed because of COVID, and register their presence in Spain, and they just couldn't do it.
And
Boris is responsible for that.
Absolutely, and also because of that short 6-day window, the Spain had a unique problem with they had a dispute over driving licenses with the UK.
Oh,
And
yes.
yeah, this affected a lot of our members.
God.
I mean, some of the people who actually were able to move and in time, but they couldn't swap their driving licenses in time because they first needed the residency card process, and that had a bit of a delay on it. So as a result, some people were prevented from driving for up to 18 months until they resolved this dispute. Some people were fined €500 a time, and they just thought, "Oh well, I'm going to drive anyway." Others didn't, obviously, but it was really, really tragic how. And we had some of our members actually had residency properly organised before Brexit, but they chose to cancel it because of this driving licence problem. So as a result, they moved back to the UK because it just didn't work for them. So,
and it's possible, isn't it, that what people might conceive to be little problems like that
yes,
are going to continue happening as long as we're not in the EU.
Definitely. Well,
and
parking permits, they're not recognised everywhere.
And also, I want to quickly clarify that when I say
can't send their children to British universities,
yep,
they have to pay the full EU fees, even though they are British and their children are British.
That's outrageous, really.
Because they don't live in Britain, they're not British residents. They have to pay the foreign students' fees, which are 2 or 3 times, and the British fees are high enough. God help.
The thing is the word empathy, isn't it? How do we make people care about these things when it doesn't affect them? For example, I think it's like 15% of people in the UK have never even been on holiday abroad, never mind moved abroad or worked abroad. How do we make people care about stuff that isn't actually affecting them? Because when I the things you guys are talking about, it doesn't really affect me, but listening to you guys talk about it makes me bloody angry, and I want to do something about it. But how do we get everyone else to feel like that when they hear you?
I think you have to get people to think about, it might not affect me, but it affects my children. I have a cousin who voted for Brexit and then discovered that her eldest son, who'd had a lovely year in Paris working in a bar and came home and then joined the Navy and is doing very well, but his younger brother can't do that. His younger brother is very, very angry with his parents because he can't go off and have a year in Europe working in bars and travelling around like his older brother did. And it's people like that. My cousin's now saying, "Oh shit, I wish I hadn't voted for Brexit because I've screwed over my own kid."
Yeah,
I think children's definitely one way to get that empathy. I mean, look at the passion people have for things like youth mobility, but yet they won't fight for their own mobility. I mean, that drives me nuts. But I think the other thing is to help people put themselves in their shoes of their future selves. Because if you're in a job, I think it's like, well, what would happen if your wife suddenly got a really good job in Belgium, right? What would you do? Would you go with her, or would you be separated? What happens if you had always dreamed of, living part of the year in Spain or in Portugal in the future? How will you do that? How will you ensure you have the right in the future? And I think that's how you get people to be a bit empathetic. They've got to empathize with. It can be selfish. It can be empathizing with their future selves.
I really think that those programs like A Place in the Sun should bang on and on about, it's lovely that this couple can come and look for their dream retirement home, but
you can't.
Have you got the income? Because you can't. That would, because do you not see? I've watched episode after episode of that.
They never mention it
when I'm over there.
They never mention
it. And I'm just looking, saying, so you've got 30,000 each in the bank. That's nice. Could you mention that on the programme so all these people going, oh, lovely, flat in Spain.
Exactly. This is something I say a lot, is that Brexit only really affected poor people. The poorer you are, the worse Brexit hit you.
That's right.
And yet, curiously, the attitude you get when you talk to people about it is, well, why should I care? Because freedom of movement is only for rich people. And you're like, no, it is now, but it used to be for everybody. Yeah. I didn't have any money when I moved to Spain. I had enough money to live for a month in
It's fair to say it makes it more convenient, but beyond that, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It affects people without their wealth much more.
Definitely. I talk a lot about well, I'm getting too old for it now. I was saying to you the other day, when Lisa, but I still like my DJing. But the DJ and clubbing and dance music culture has really suffered from Brexit, because DJs don't get paid a lot to perform anyway, unless you know, Pete Tong or something. And so they're finding that nightclubs in Europe just aren't hiring British up and coming artists and DJs anymore, and vice versa. A lot of British clubs can't afford to get in the smaller name European artists anymore like they used to. And if you look at the history of how a lot of, you know, drum and bass, house and stuff like that came up, it was born through freedom of movement, if you like, and that's gone now. And that's just, you know, one tiny bit.
It's gone for now, Peter. It's gone for now. I'm hopeful it'll come back.
What I mean is gone right now in this moment. I agree with you, Andrew. We're gonna be back in the EU. It's when, not if.
All musicians, bands, orchestras, the lot, they've all been screwed by it.
The entire crazy.
And again, that's one of the low-lying fruit, the low-hanging fruit, so Lisa was talking about, that Keir Starmer could easily go for that. Nobody's going to say, "Oh no, we don't want young musicians."
I know, right?
Well, you asked about empathy and how do we get people to show empathy, and a lot of our members struggle to tell their stories because they don't necessarily have the same things in common with everybody else. So you know, for example, we have a lot of people who have, you know, two homes. They might have a small apartment in Spain and a house in Manchester or something, and it's very difficult to get empathy from people who say, well, they've got two homes, right? You know, and well, they may have two homes because they may need to work part of the year in Spain. I mean, who knows? Everybody's different.
Do you know what we need to do? I think we need to. Do you know the Post Office documentary?
Yes.
Was it Horizon, weren't it?
Yes.
We need to get all of the stories from people like you guys and people that you know, and give them to a talented writer, so that he can write exactly that style of documentary, to show that it's not all just like millionaires living out in Spain or whatever.
And that's what all our members, that's why we kept our group together, because we knew that when the time came that the UK would reconsider what it's done, this huge mistake it's done, we knew that they would need to justify restoring freedom of movement. And if this conversation was just about immigration, particularly with small boats and asylum and all that kind of stuff, it's not something you can easily win. That you can't win that public debate very easily. But if you've got all the stories ready, as we have, we've got all the stories. And I've always believed that the government will not restore freedom of movement and therefore will not rejoin the EU until they have a reason to do it. Yeah. And so our members are a reason. They provide the reason.
Human stories. Do you remember, Lisa, we had Caelan Robertson on this podcast, and he was very, very right wing. He was the left, you know, the wingman of Tommy Robertson and his cameraman for a long time, and he come out with it the other side, and it was he believed all the anti-immigration stuff too, and voted to leave the EU because of the immigration stuff. And he's a documentary maker. He does is a lot of his own stuff, and he went to was it Afghanistan or somewhere like that, Lisa? It was somewhere like that anyway, but he went there to make a film, and the intention was to make it for a right-wing news channel to show men coming over a fence.
I think it was Turkey. I think it was the Turkey border or something like that.
Yes, it was Turkey.
Yeah, it was on the border of Turkey, and so he was there under the radar himself. He shouldn't have been there.
That's right. Yeah. So he was worried about being arrested himself just for being there, and he wanted to film loads of men coming over the border into the boats, because they all say it's young fighting age men, don't they? But he was shocked and surprised to see many women and children there. So, and then at that point, they heard that there was authorities in the area, so he was like, well,
helicopters above
them, and he was like, I'm going to get arrested because I shouldn't be here. So he sat down with the migrants and realised at that point, I'm in the exact same situation of these guys are, and I'm going to be arrested for the same thing that these guys are. And then he was talking to the people there, and then he started filming them instead. And it was that moment, hearing people's human stories of why they were there, that completely changed him to who he is today. And I think that's why the Horizon documentary worked so well, because it just told human stories. And I think it needs to be done for freedom of movement, and it's you guys who know all the stories, and we need to collate them all, I think. Or you should, not me.
I think
there is a book, In Limbo, that was done.
Yeah, it's excellent.
There was the In Limbo and In Limbo 2. In Limbo was about European people living in Britain and their fears and how terrified they were. This was during the Brexit period. And then there was In Limbo 2, which some of our members are featured in. And that is certainly a format that could be revisited. The people who produced the In Limbo books gave copies of them to every politician and every MP. And we know some of them actually read them and were moved by those stories.
I think we need an In Limbo 3 for all the people between two places that are just can't live as they used to.
And then we can have In Limbo 4, and that one can be set in space, because they always end up going to space, the sequels, don't they?
I do think individual stories work well, and that's something we should, and we've talked about it before, looking at is, some of us do contribute to the Violence Network, and, maybe focusing on individual stories, because occasionally when there is one in the main stream media or press in the UK, it does very well and people are surprised, unless it's one, I've got 60 houses and I can't move, or something, like that, or, whatever. But yes.
So much of this debate around freedom of movement has become a bit toxic because of the asylum and the small boats thing. And I'm going to borrow a phrase which I first saw Molly Scott Cato tweet, and I thought this was so good. I use this phrase all the time now, that the UK threw away a mutual mobility scheme and replaced it with an immigration scheme that's one way to the UK. And when you explain that, people think, well, why on earth is it, and again, a points-based immigration scheme isn't limited. It isn't even quota limited. It's potentially unlimited coming to the UK if anybody has the point.
Do you know what, though? I worry, Andrew, that if you point that out to certain people anyway, that's not going to make them come to our side. It's going to make them just push harder to have an even tougher immigration stance in our country, maybe.
I've heard people say that the issues with asylum migration, some really sad human stories there. But it is a different topic to freedom movement. It's nothing to do with freedom movement. And you've got these three things. You've got asylum and immigration. You've got visa approved immigration. Again, the UK is happy with those because they've approved the visas. And then this third thing, this idea of mutual mobility, where it's not immigration at all. You actually make the borders bigger. And a lot of people, I think we have to kill the myth that immigration is about uncontrolled immigration. Freedom of movement is we've got to kill that myth, because
it should be like someone moving from Texas to California.
Yes, exactly. I know somebody who goes from Manchester to work in Lincoln. Well, the people in Lincoln don't complain because somebody from Manchester's come. So why do they complain when somebody from Frankfurt comes?
I've had that exact argument with my very Brexity. Well, he's not my boss anymore, where he used to be. And I used to say, well, I'm living here, I'm in Tamworth, and I'm from London, so shouldn't you have a problem with me being here? Exactly. And I went, hang on a minute, where are you from? And he was from somewhere else over the country. I went, what are you doing here? You know what I mean? Taking all these Tamworth jobs. These should be left here for Tamworth people.
Or English people
Irish and half Welsh and grew up in England.
Exactly. Where do you draw the line?
I'm Welsh.
English people working in Wales and Welsh people working in England. Goodness me, outrageous.
Terrible, isn't it?
I mean, the good news is when you do poll the question and you word it, do you agree with mutual freedom of movement? I haven't got it in front of me. It was work that
84%.
Yeah, it's really. I was going to say it's really high, but I didn't want to.
It's in my brain.
84% was saying yes, and people need to understand that freedom of movement really was used by a lot of young people. And often it was temporary. So they would come in and then go back after a few years. Also, their families are so much closer by. They're 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hours away. So you don't have to bring your family with you for support. And you know, they come from similar economies. So they, like say, they often went back and they could move freely and organically into job vacancies through hospitality, through the care work, you know, and it just filled the job vacancies organically. Single visa applications will never, ever replace that flexibility.
Somebody told me they had to pay 15,000 for a visa to come and work in the UK. I mean, at that kind of financial commitment, you're going to want to, it's going to be forever, isn't it? And you're going to bring your whole family.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I think we have probably wrapped up. We could probably talk about 1,000 other issues around freedom of movement.
We should have a part 2.
We should have a part 2.
Can I just ask one thing? I want to hear about Brexit the elephant.
Brexit the elephant. Yeah, this was something I kind of discovered by so for anybody that doesn't know, it's on Twitter at Brexit elephant is the handle, or the hashtag Brexit the elephant. And I created it with AI a couple of weeks ago, and just posted some funny stuff about the idea is it's an elephant that's in Westminster and nobody can see him. So this elephant lives the life of an MP. He's in the tea room, he's in the dining room, he's in Parliament, he's even lying back on the benches just like Jacob Rees-Mogg did. And this has really captured people's imagination. And we're using Brexit the elephant to actually tackle some of the, in very simple terms, what it actually means for people. So there was a story last week about carnets and music, the music industry, and how the orchestras find it difficult to tour because they need a carnet for each instrument. They have to pay all the VAT when their instruments come in and get a refund, all this stuff. And we use Brexit the elephant to explain that. And again, people just seem to be loving it.
It's really brilliant. That's why. How good are you with AI video?
Well, I'm not got into that yet. So it's all a bit new for me, and I call it artificial intelligence as well. So
because I think he should have a speech at the next National Rejoin March if he can work out to make it a video.
I'm not dressing up as an elephant, by the way.
Or do that, yeah. You've got till next year to make it an AI video. Then, otherwise, you're going to have to get a costume.
Oh, okay. I have to work out how to do this. You'll have to help me with that.
Brilliant. All right, guys. Well, what I'll do is I will post some links below for Bremain in Spain, so if you've moved in Brexit elephant, etc., like that. And thank you so much to our guests. Please remember to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Rejoin.